It is at 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
On top of the morning, Dan and Amy, something our next guest wrote has led me to have some concerns about J.D. Vance. He wrote a piece about the phony couch accusation directed at Vance that he had intimate relations with a couch.
Do you know how many people thought that was real?
Same a number of people who think that Tampon Tim is a horse semen guzzler.
Yeah. Well, we did have fun with that because we knew that was probably fake, but that story's been going around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
According to my friends in Minnesota.
That didn't concern me. What concerns me, his playlists on Spotify.
Uh-oh, what now?
J.D. Vance seems to be experiencing a regression in his musical taste because I understand from earlier playlists that have been identified under J.D. Vance on Spotify, I should say. Playlists included Johnny Cash, Old Crow Medicine Show. He had an entire playlist dedicated to Otis Redding, Marvin Gaye, Aretha Franklin, so he liked Motown.
Mm-hmm.
But then later playlists, and this is, I think, post Yale Law School or towards the end of Yale Law School, so you should have known better. He was on his playlist, Justin Bieber.
Oh, I love Justin Bieber.
Yeah, well, that's not helping. Backstreet Boys, Death Cab for Cutie.
Kind of retro now, right? Justin Bieber, Backstreet Boys. What's old is new.
I don't know. I'm the boy.
You're very concerned about this.
Well, the boy band thing is troubling.
At least it's not 90 degrees.
90 degrees.
Or what's that one?
98 degrees.
98 degrees.
Yeah.
So hip into the boy band. Yes.
Yeah.
Love the boy bands.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to read into it. I just feel like, in the interest of full disclosure, we have to tackle. We have to, expose candidates for high office. I mean, he's a heartbeat away from the presidency, could be, and he's listening to Backstreet Boys.
Some people like to have a little fun. It's all right.
River Page is a reporter at the Free Press. He joins us now. River, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah, this country will see my Social Security number before they'll see my Spotify playlist. You got to keep those things private.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's a mistake, but everything comes out when you're a national candidate, so this was inevitably going to come out. I mean, do you think having Of Monsters and Men on your Spotify playlist, do you think that's disqualifying?
I mean, for a heterosexual man, maybe.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I don't know.
See?
I'm gay, so I can have whatever on there, and people are a little more forgiving. But
well, you're even in a better position to make that judgment call then. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Something else I wanted to get to on a little bit more serious note, if we could. This piece that you wrote about this indie film, this indie, I guess it's a documentary, right? Called "Thank You for Sharing."
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, just I mean, sort of. It was interesting because of your own the sort of an anecdote about yourself that you shared, and then it sort of leads into a discussion of the documentary, which is something that's sort of that Abigail Shrier has taken up too, which is as much as we talk about the spike in mental health issues among young people, particularly coming out of the lockdowns during COVID. We're still, one of the things we need to be careful is that we don't get too far over our skis and overdiagnose mental illness, and maybe that's where we're at in this country right now.
Yeah, totally. And we actually just hired Abigail. She's a columnist for us now at the Free Press, and she's fantastic. But yeah, the documentary is called "Thank You for Sharing." It's about overdiagnosis, various mental health conditions, and in some ways, like how the focus on mental health and mental health awareness broadly, just like this big idea that there is a mental health crisis and we're all living in it, and that like you have this bucket of symptoms that everybody can like sort of pick and choose from. In some ways, it's like sort of making things worse, making people focus more and more on themselves and their like fleeting emotions and maybe their quirks or whatever. And it's really it seems to be making us more mentally ill. There is a paradox that's been described in various psychological literature called like the in the document they call it the mental health paradox. I believe the actual name of it is like the
treatment prevalence prevalence paradox.
Yeah, you got it in front of you. Yeah. And it's basically the idea is that people in like the psychology field cannot figure out why, even though treatments are going up, people are still getting more and more progressively mentally ill. Something like 47% of Gen Z have a diagnosed mental illness. So it's just getting worse and worse with time. There's various different metrics you can look at.
47% of Gen Z have a diagnosed mental illness.
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, that's so and part of this is as you talk about is the criteria to establish that diagnosis. It's gotten gooier and gooier, more open-ended and more open-ended, and all the incentives are to make the diagnosis.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I started with an anecdote of mine when I was in college. I lived with a psychology major, and she like caught me reading like some weird article about like Uzbek cotton exports, which was like it was like some rabbit hole I found on the internet, and she asked me if I'd ever been tested for autism, like high functioning autism. And she started listening. She was like, well, sometimes you don't make eye contact, and sometimes you don't, whatever. And I was like, I'm fine. But like, it did give me like a sort of anxiety about it. I started looking into it and like all this other stuff. And it's not that. I was a shy kid. I've gotten over that with time. I'm sort of like curious, and I do like find like sort of niche, strange things that I'm interested in. But I mean, that's probably why I have a career in journalism. These things can actually be good in certain fields, and people are different inherently, and that doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with them. But there's a sense where people tend to pathologize almost everything now. So if you're shy, that's no longer like a personality trait. That's social anxiety disorder, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Right. If you are, maybe a little bit more curious than the average person, a little bit more like awkward, that can be, a sign of autism. And I mean, the guy, one of the doctors who helped broaden the sort of diagnosis for autism in the 90s, he's actually come out and said that he regrets doing it. He thinks it was a mistake. He thinks that there's like a lot of people now who are just being diagnosed with autism who don't have autism. Maybe they have something else, or they have actually nothing wrong with them. It's just like normal human variation. So I mean, I think it's a big problem. You can see it a lot too with diagnosis of major depressive disorder, where they're like, if you have any of these emotions, and if you look through it, I mean, it's stuff that almost everybody has felt at some point in their life. And they're like, if you have this for more than 2 weeks, that means that it's major depressive disorder, when really it could just be something that's going on in your life. The things in your life aren't going the way you want them to, and instead of getting on like an SSRI, maybe there are like changes that you can make, or maybe you just have to write it out. Like sometimes you have to accept that there are things in your life you can't change. And
yeah,
well,
and
did you go to a doctor?
These are normal problems. These turn out to be like sort of mundane problems of growing up.
Right. And I mean, if you've ever been around, I've had members of my family who had like extreme mental illness, like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. If you've ever been around like genuine mental illness, like it's something that most people can recognize. You don't even have to really go to a professional to know that something's like very wrong. And of course there are exceptions to that, but I think that like was a time where people were more resilient. They had a better understanding of themselves, and they also viewed things less in terms of the optimum, sort of goal in your life as being happy. People used to think that the point of their lives was to be a good person. We used to be more sort of like communal, sort of spiritual people. It's a very individualistic, secular society now, and people think that the point of their lives is to be happy, and they find that they're not very good at being happy all the time, because being happy is a very fleeting emotion. And so I think that's also a big problem.
Well, right. And the other part of it, 47% of Gen Z with a diagnosed mental disorder. I mean, that's absurd. And it also speaks to a social contagion as part of this, right? Part of the culture also is in the direction of, number one, it celebrates victim status, particularly manufactured victim status. And it also absolves personal responsibility. I'm not responsible for this or for that, for not doing my homework because I suffered some childhood trauma when my dad told me to make my bed every morning, and so I'm still trying to recover from the toxic masculinity that polluted my upbringing or something. I mean, this you see this all the time. These phony traumas with respect, but because we celebrate the victim, you beget more of this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I just think it is 42%, not 47%. But
well,
it's still terrible.
I mean,
right?
that's
still way too much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Abigail Schreier's new book, Bad Therapy, talks a lot about trauma and like how the definition of that. I mean, it used to be very like this was the documentary talks about this as well. Is like the idea of like something like PTSD emerged during like World War I when they were trying to explain what they called back then shell shock. Right. So, I mean, you were dealing like with people who had been in combat being shot at, and that's a very different sort of experience than anything, even like a really like bad thing that you might encounter in your life, like having like an alcoholic, verbally abusive parent. I mean, that's not good for a kid. That doesn't mean that they're like going to have the same sort of like symptoms as a World War I veteran, right? It's just kind of
right. But according to your article, once your roommate said this to you, you couldn't stop reading about autism. How did you break that cycle?
I honestly, at some point I just kind of came to the realization that like if there is something wrong with me, that it hasn't really held me back in any way. And I mean, to be quite honest, I'm sort of lucky in a way that I wasn't super privileged. I was working like 2 jobs when I went to college. My parents didn't bankroll me or anything. And I just kind of got distracted by other things in my life, quite frankly. It was like, well, I can't let this hold me back. And I think in some ways that was kind of a blessing that I didn't had time to just sit around and stew about it.
Right. I can't let this hold me back, and because there is no this. I mean, that's part of the point.
There is no this, and even if there was, I don't have time to deal with it. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, well, the other thing though too, just in terms of the incentives, the way this industry works, and it's an industry that's full of fraudsters. But you have trial lawyers too. Trial lawyers are a problem because now you've incentivized these people to identify as victims and say I looked on WebMD and I've got all the symptoms of somebody with chronic depression, self-diagnosis. Then I go to an actual professional, say I think I'm depressed, and their incentive is to, well, okay, and here's a prescription, so they indemnify themselves against any harm, self-harm that may come to a patient. So it's, in other words, if he says so, I'm just here to confirm it, because if I confirm it, then at least I insulate myself from, a malpractice case. If this kid really is depressed and he would do some harm to himself or others, I can say, well, I treated him, and that's the most I could do. I upheld my professional obligations.
Yeah, that I actually discovered that in a review of Abigail Schreier's book, where a psychologist was reviewing the book and basically said, well, I can't really take Abigail Schreier's advice and tell a kid to, walk it off, even if I think maybe they should, because, I could open myself up to malpractice lawsuits. And, I mean, I think that might be something that laws would have to be involved to change that. Because I mean, it is in some ways like an understandable position from, I mean,
Yeah.
it would be terrible. I mean, it would be terrible to like make that mistake and like lose a patient, but it would also be, but then if it destroys your entire career and your entire life, I mean, if I were in that position, I would probably just give the kid an SSRI too. So, I mean, I think something like there needs to be like a national conversation about this. I think that there are going to have to be reforms that are passed. Like, I'm not sure exactly whether, you can do that through federal guidance or through laws or insurance companies or however it gets done. But like, there has to be some sort of conversation about, when recognizing overtreatment as a problem and a form of mispractice in and of itself, sometimes.
Yeah, well, civil justice reform is a big part of the answer to that question. But River Page, he's a reporter at the Free Press. River, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hey, I'm going to let you in on a wireless hack that can